Hey, good morning. Sorry, running a little late this morning, which is weird because I got up really early. But just running a few minutes late. It continues to be just an awesome morning here in western Nebraska, and a little cooler last night, which was nice. A little cooler this morning, which was a nice break after the weekend. And looking forward to this week. And I hope you are all as well. Good morning to Roseanne and Ruth and Nancy. It is so good to see each of you this morning. We are continuing our read through the book of Genesis together, and today we're going to read Genesis 38. So if you have your Bible with you, or you access it on your app, however you do that, I just want to encourage you to follow along so you can read and be like, wow, this is really in the Bible. This is one of the stories that we talked about last year during our Christmas series, which I laugh because stuff like that always strikes me as really funny. This morning while I was on my morning run, I was just thinking, man, I wonder what people really think of me sometimes when I like reading this during our Christmas series. But it's about a person who is in the lineage of Jesus, and this is why these genealogies matter, and we've talked a lot about that. So 38 days, so we're probably 2 plus months into the book of Genesis that we've been talking, and the genealogies have come up multiple times, and they are an important part of the text, because they demonstrate the reality of who God is. When God makes promises to people, He's making them to actual people. So one of the things that we can learn from the genealogies is we're reading the stories of people. These aren't just, in our minds, this isn't just like this massive humanity that lived thousands of years ago. These are actual people who have experienced the fulfillment of God's work in their lives. They're also actual people who. Good morning to Dwight and Liz Vance. Glad you're joining us. Good morning, Lori Smith. These are also people who experience the fullness of God's blessing. They're also people who we want to be really cautious in putting up on a pedestal, right? We want to be really cautious of saying, oh man, those, and whoever the author of Hebrews is gets into this a little bit in Hebrews chapter 11. But like these are real people, and they did not, like Hebrews 11 talks about how these people pre-Christ didn't experience the fullness of everything God had to offer because they didn't experience Christ, and we have experienced Christ. So the author of Hebrews really makes the argument that it's not a competition of blessing, but we are to be blessed more than them because we've experienced Christ. And then in a story like we're going to read today from Genesis 38, which I'm going to get to in a second because there's 30 verses. We see when we put people on the pedestal, we come across a story like this that just reveals the full-on sinful nature and sinfulness of mankind. These are broken, sinful people who make poor choices, and I think that's really good news for us because despite being broken, sinful people who make poor choices, God works in their life anyway. And that's something that I need to hear like every single day of my life is that God is at work even in a broken, sinful person like myself. God is at work. And my hunch is you need to hear that as well as a broken, sinful person. So in part, I think we have stories like, oh, my cat just got out. In part, we have stories like the one that we're going to read today to remind us of our sinfulness as though we needed to be reminded, and to remind us of God's goodness and work despite that sinfulness. So with all that, let's hop right in to Genesis 38. Again, I'd love for you to follow along. About this time, Judah left home and moved to Adullam, where he stayed with a man named Hira. There he saw a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua, and he married her. When he slept with her, she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and he named the boy Then she became pregnant again and gave birth to another son, and she named him Onan. And when she gave birth to a third son, she named him Shelah. At the time of Shelah's birth, they were living at Kezib. In the course of time, Judah arranged for his firstborn, to marry a young woman named Tamar. But was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Er's brother Onan, "Go and marry Tamar, as our law requires of the brother of the man who has died. You must produce an heir for your brother." But Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. So whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled the semen on the ground. This prevented her from having a child who would belong to his brother. But the Lord considered it evil for Onan to deny a child to his dead brother. So the Lord took Onan's life too. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Go back to your parents' home and remain a widow until my son Shelah is old enough to marry you." But Judah didn't really intend to do this because he was afraid Shelah would also die like his two brothers. So Tamar went back to live in her father's home. Some years later, Judah's wife died. After the time of mourning was over, Judah and his friend Hira the Adullamite went up to Timnah to supervise the shearing of his sheep. Someone told Tamar, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." Tamar was aware that Shelah had grown up, but no arrangements had been made for her to come and marry him. So she changed out of her widow's clothing and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Then she sat beside the road at the entrance to the village of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. Judah noticed her and thought she was a prostitute since she had covered her face. So he stopped and propositioned her. "Let me have sex with you," he said, not realizing she was his own daughter-in-law. "How much will you pay to have sex with me?" Tamar asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," Judah promised. "But what will you give me to guarantee that you will send the goat?" she asked. "What kind of guarantee do you want?" he replied. She answered, "Leave me your identification seal and its cord and the walking stick you are carrying." So Judah gave them to her. Then he had intercourse with her, and she became pregnant. Afterwards she went back home, took off her veil, and put on her widow's clothing as usual. Later, Judah asked his friend Hira the Adullamite to take the young goat to the woman and to pick up the things he had given her as his guarantee. But Hira couldn't find her, so he asked the men who lived there, "Where can I find the shrine prostitute who is sitting beside the road at the entrance of Enaim?" "We've never had a shrine prostitute here," they replied. So Hira returned to Judah and told him, "I couldn't find her anywhere, and the men of the village claim they've never had a shrine prostitute there." "Then let her keep the things I gave her," Judah said. "I sent the young goat as we agreed, but you couldn't find her. We'd be the laughing stock of the village if we went back again to look for her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has acted like a prostitute, and now because of this she's pregnant." "Bring her out and let her be burned," Judah demanded. But as they were taking her out to kill her, she sent this message to her father-in-law: "The man who owns these things made me pregnant. Look closely. Whose seal and cord and walking stick are these?" Judah recognized them immediately and said, "She's more righteous than I am because I didn't arrange for her to marry my son Shelah." And Judah never slept with Tamar again. When it came time for Tamar to give birth, it was discovered that she was carrying twins. While she was in labor, one of the babies reached out his hand. The midwife grabbed it and tied a scarlet string around the child's wrist, announcing, "This one came out first." But then he pulled back his hand, and out came his brother. "What?" the midwife exclaimed. "How did you break out first?" So he was named Perez. Then the baby with the scarlet string on his wrist was born, and he was named Zerah. One of the things that I think is interesting, and I really didn't notice it until I was reading it now with you, was was how Judah gave up the things that were his identity, his identification seal and its cord, and the walking stick that he was carrying. Takes me back to earlier in the book of Genesis, where Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of stew, and then gave up and then lost his blessing over being deceived, like giving up his identity. I never really noticed that was a thread in this scene and in this story as well. We've talked a lot about this. We did this back in December, and I shared a little more earlier. I want to just point out that this is one of those stories that in the Old Testament that sometimes people will say, "See, look at the behavior that God condoned." Is this this sexual ethic? Is this what Christianity is about? Talking about, oh yeah, what a great example this is in the Bible. And just really quickly to say, like, I would say there is nothing in this story where that gives any indication that God is condoning or approving of this behavior. There's not even a hint in this story where God is approving or happy or thrilled or set this up or anything. Like, this is not this kind of stuff doesn't make God happy. And I think we want to be mindful that stories like this are in the Bible. We want to be aware of them. But yeah, there is no indication that that God was excited that this took place. And it's because, like, we see these names and we see these stories, like these things again, these are going to come up later in the story. If we were to flip through the Old Testament and we get to the book of Ruth, what we're going to find is the person that Ruth marries is from this line of Tamar and Judah and their son Perez. We're going to see that in the story. So this is just an example of, it's not just, but it's an example of the way God works when mankind is sinful. God desires to move His plan forward, even when we mess with it. God is going to see to it that His plans are fulfilled. And if we were to go back to Genesis 12, we'd see that God's plan is to make for Himself a nation of every tribe and tongue and nation, a people of every tribe, tongue, and nation. And He's not going to let people's disobedience get in the way of His plan. He's going to utilize that, and just because He utilizes it does not mean that He condones this kind of thing. And like when tomorrow we're going to pick up in Genesis 39. Genesis 39 picks up right where Genesis 37 left off. Like, it just continues the story, continues the story of Joseph. So this chapter 38, is just kind of dropped right into the middle of the story. Not as a, hey, you should live out this. This is how you should, this is what it looks like to honor and obey God. But it's part of the story. It's part of God's story. And we have the opportunity to embrace every aspect of God's story. We have the opportunity to participate in every aspect of God's story. As sinful people, God restores and renews us, and we have the opportunity to participate in that. I'm going to pray, and then I'll finish, and we'll get about our day. God, thank you for your word this morning. Thank you for the way that you work in us and through us, despite our sinful choices and in the midst of our sinful choices. First, help us to be obedient. Help us to not make sinful choices. And when we do, help us to experience the fullness of your grace, the fullness of your mercy, and help us to see how your plans are moving forward. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Hey, I want to encourage you this week to do a couple things. Continue to read through the book of Genesis. I want to encourage you to do that. Also, on Sunday, we are talking about Revelation 4 and 5. So if you have the opportunity, which I think you do, so I'm not even going to say that. I'm just going to encourage you to read Genesis 4 and 5 this week in preparation for Sunday, and read the entire Revelation, and read the entire book of Revelation. I've said this several times last week, said it on Sunday. It'll take you 90 minutes. And that seems like a really long time, but I know how much TV I can binge watch. I can make 90 minutes disappear in no time. So I just want to encourage you to read through Revelation 4 and 5 in particular, and generally just read through the book of Revelation this week, and come ready to talk about that on Sunday. So I love you guys. I'm praying with you, praying for you. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow morning when we talk about Genesis chapter 39. Have a great rest of your day.